In these jets, and they seem very much structured in a specific point. Surely ice would be, randomized. It would be
Yeah,
random,
it would be more random, and it also would spin with the object. So either you would get jets only pointed towards the sun and somehow it then gets swept up by the solar wind, which is the usual situation. So then you end up with a cometary tail. In this case, no, you see jets in all directions and they seem to be fixed. With respect to NASA, just yesterday I heard from independent sources that they're hoping, the high-rise team is hoping to release the data within a few days, meaning by the 18th of November or so. Let's see if it happens. And the other argument they made is, because of the government shutdown, they could not release it. Now, they singled out the data on 3i Atlas. They did release data on Mars from the same camera. And the argument there is that the data on Mars does not need any processing, whereas because 3i Atlas is moving in the sky of Mars, they had to somehow track it, and that required more work on the images. And during the government shutdown, they couldn't really conduct this work and get feedback from the NASA administrators on the results. And so that was the argument. But I agree with you that it makes very little sense to hold data for 43 days hostage just because of bureaucratic rules. There are plenty of scientists who are affiliated, most of them affiliated with the University of Arizona. They are not government employees. They could have processed the data for a long time ago, and they might have already done it. And then the only issue is sharing it in a repository with scientists. They don't need to go out to the press, and it's not a matter of public relations. It's more about advancing scientific knowledge. And it turns out that, maybe they thought that it would be better to come out to the media with an announcement from NASA headquarters. But the damage they did in public relations by not releasing the data is worse than the privilege of releasing it now that the government is open.
I find you said there an interesting thing that I think the public interest is fascinating from especially from you take yourself, Avi, and what you've created in the past few weeks. The shows you've been on, Joe Rogan and so on. I mean, I could go on and on the different podcasts that you've been on, and people are fascinated. You became a celebrity overnight. I understand you're a celebrity already in the scientific world, but in the public eye, I think you're generating future scientists. Because people are taking an interest. And I saw a little clip of you talking about the creativity matching the scientific world, and you had done a painting. You've been given a gift.
It's really remarkable, I must say, because before all of this, there was this notion that science is an occupation of the elite. And you might ask, why does the public have has that notion? And I think it's because the scientists are shying away from the public and only appearing in front of the public in a press conference where they educate the public about what they think is the truth, as if the public is students in their class. They're telling them what they need to know. There is no two-way communication here. And first of all, that's the wrong approach. Why? Because very often whatever truth is revealed in a press conference ends up being corrected later. We know of many instances where scientists were saying one thing and then they changed it. Why? Because science is work in progress. And sometimes you get new evidence that changes your view. Sometimes you're simply wrong in your assertions. And we should be frank about it. We should be honest with the public. And what I'm trying to do is show the scientific process. Basically, it's all based on collecting evidence and figuring out things, just like in a detective story. And the public resonates with that. And the scientists do not understand that. So you have, on the one hand, those communicators of science, those that are popularizing science, like Brian Cox in the UK, Neil deGrasse Tyson in the US. and they're not actually actively engaged in doing the science. They're just talking about work that other people are doing. And basically, they want to be liked by the public, and they want to be liked at the same time, but by the people who they're talking about. Okay. And what is remarkable is, for example, in fundamental theoretical physics, for 50 years, the mainstream was working on extra dimensions. It's called string theory, and in an attempt to unify quantum mechanics and gravity. Completely speculative. We have no clue whatsoever that those string theories are on the right path to describing reality. Why? Because they never tested their theory. And also, the theory is not unique in its predictions. There are many versions of the theory, and you don't know which one is correct. And there is no experiment in the foreseeable future that will test it. So it's completely speculative, and you have a whole community engaged in that and doing intellectual gymnastics, impressing each other, okay? Just showing off with mathematical virtuosity. You don't see Brian Cox, you don't see Neil deGrasse Tyson saying this is 50 years where taxpayers' money was spent, but nothing came out, and we don't know if in the foreseeable future we will see anything. They don't say that. They're not critical of those speculations, even though they are complete speculations with no test in the foreseeable. I'm not just talking about the past not being tested, the past 50 years. The theory has no prospects for being tested in the foreseeable future. There is no proposed test whatsoever on the table, or funded or unfunded, no proposed test. Yet those popularizers of science have no critical comments to make. Why? Because they realize this is popular within science. They have to be liked. They cannot criticize, even though it makes no sense. And the public would not be happy that for 50 years money was spent on an endeavor that didn't lead anywhere. And that includes also supersymmetry, a whole symmetry of nature that lots of people were working on and turned out to be wrong, at least in the natural parameter space, according to the Large Hadron Collider CERN. So they are not criticizing. However, when I say we have objects that are technological, in space, plus objects that are natural, like rocks, let's consider both possibilities in the context of an incoming strange object from interstellar space. That, to me, is common sense. Yet, both Brian Cox and Neil deGrasse Tyson and others, people who have less visibility, immediately attack me and say that is completely speculative. How dare you talk about it? We know it's a comet. Stop it. And they attack me personally. Now, I'm trying to bring this contrast between having a community of people doing something that makes no sense for 50 years with no verification, and me speaking about something we know exists. We launched equipment to space, so we know it exists in space. We know that there are 100 billion stars like the sun in the Milky Way galaxy. We know that a fair fraction of them, of all the 10%, have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So, and we know that we came from a soup of chemicals on Earth. And so if the conditions are similar on those, tens of billions of Earth-Sun analogs, why is it so speculative to say, let's consider the possibility that something like us existed and sent equipment the way we do, and we can just figure it out by collecting evidence, and until we have definite proof that an object coming into the solar system is strange for reasons that we understand, we should consider the possibility that it's strange because it's technological. This is, to me, it sounds like common sense. To the public, it sounds completely like common sense. And then what do you see? You see young kids telling their parents, we want to become scientists. And I got maybe a dozen emails like that, in addition to emails that from the UK, for example, that apologized to me, including from the city of Manchester, where Brian Cox is, apologized to me in the way that he behaves. And the public seems to be fascinated by this possibility, by the scientific discourse that is based on collecting more evidence and figuring things out, just like in a detective story. And, so it illustrates two aspects that are completely missed by the academic community. They are blind to those aspects. That first, that people have trust in science when we don't pretend to know the answer in advance, where we follow the evidence, like with everyone. The scientists are not on a pedestal. speaking like teachers to the public. Instead, let's figure it out together. And everything is transparent and human. We can make mistakes. As scientists, we can make mistakes, are part of the learning process. That's, again, pretending that scientists do not make mistakes is really inappropriate, because even Albert Einstein, when he was most celebrated, 1935 to 1940, he came to the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, had the most lucrative position, world recognized. He did his most important work until then. Then he comes and makes 3 mistakes in 5 years, saying black holes probably do not exist, gravitational waves do not exist, quantum mechanics doesn't have spooky action at a distance. And the experimental teams that showed that he's wrong, they got the Nobel Prizes over the past decade, three different Nobel Prizes in physics. What does it show? It shows like anyone can make mistakes if they are creative, if they are willing to consider possibilities beyond what we currently know, okay? And that's part of the process.
You had the team for the black hole thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you had the team, and I mean, what being in your position? I mean, look, you're at Harvard, and what do your students and peers at Harvard think of your?
Oh, I have, they have great respect, because I chaired the astronomy department at Harvard for 9 years. These are 3 consecutive terms. I also chaired the board on physics and astronomy of the National Academies. I was director of 2 centers. I'm still director of one at Harvard. So I served in many leadership positions, and people who are close to me, they know me. Okay, I haven't changed. I did these leadership positions as a service to my environment to, enhance excellence and creativity as much as I can. And anyone that works with me, that knows me, has no issue, because I haven't changed. It's those that don't know me, that lack imagination, that want to think within the box, they get really upset. And my point is, I cannot solve their problem. I would advise their therapist to solve their problems, but it's not my job. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just trying to follow scientific practice where, it's very common that if you have anomalous data, it's the duty of theorists like myself to come up with possible interpretations so that observers will collect even more data and rule out one of them. So if people have a problem with the anomalies I point out, they should just explain them. That's all. They need to write a paper explaining those anomalies. And I wrote already a few papers trying to explain some of the anomalies. But what I find is all these critics say it's a comet, period, but they don't explain the anomalies.
Can you win me along?